everyone, and welcome to Cooking with Margot, Episode 1, Season 1. For today's episode, we will be seeing all the different ways that we are able to reuse different parts of the human body. However, before we begin, there are a few steps we need to take. There are 2 steps that all chefs take before starting their meal. The first step we must take is understanding where our food comes from. All these recipes that I will be sharing come from my grandmother, Mary Roach. My grandmother, Mary Roach, was fascinated by all the different ways the human body could be eaten. To discover more about this, she traveled all the way to China. One major problem my grandmother faced in China was the fact that she was not able to speak Chinese. In return, she hired a translator named Sandy. When my grandmother was in China, she went to a funeral home to learn more about the stories of how the Chinese have eaten people. When she arrived there, she met an old woman who was very angry about her curiosity and said that she would not help her with any of her questions. After this, my grandmother decided she was going to read and ask local people in China to learn more about human cannibalism. Now that we have learned about the history of our food, let's move on to step 2. Washing our hands. It is very important to wash our hands before we start cooking, as we will be dealing with a dead specimen and we do not want to get any sort of infection. Now, we can finally begin our different recipes. Lucky for us, all these recipes have one ingredient in common: one human body. For those of you that do not have an extra human body lying around, there are a couple ways we can go about obtaining them. Our first option is digging up a dead corpse. In order to do this, you will need to go to a graveyard, preferably at night, and dig up a dead body. Our next option is looking for a dead body on the black market. However, this tends to be quite skeptical and there are a lot of legal issues that are involved, so this one I would not recommend. Our final option is asking family and friends if they would either like to donate their own bodies or if they have any bodies lying around that they could possibly lend. Now that we have obtained the body, let's get into our first recipe. Our first recipe is quite simple, and all it involves is 1 capful of urine. By taking this capful of urine, the individual is supposed to be cured of their diabetes within just a couple of days. Recipe number 2. Recipe number 2 is a little bit more complicated and will actually involve a lot of planning ahead. Recipe number 2 starts with finding a man about aged 70 to 80. This man will need to consume only honey for many days until he is fully made of honey. This man then must be wrapped into a coffin and left underground for 100 years. After these 100 years, this man will be fully macerated and you can eat the body as you please. Recipe number 3. Recipe number 3 is quite simple. All you will need is liquid human feces. You will then feed these feces to the individual who would like them, and this is supposed to help cure their worms. Recipe number 4. Recipe number 4 is also quite simple. All you will need is 1 dead body. You are then free to choose any part of the human body to cut off and eat as it is. Parts I would recommend are the stomach, the buttocks, and the legs. Recipe number 5. Recipe number 5 involves the human placenta. This placenta can either be cooked into pizza, in which you will need cheese and pepperoni, or it can be cooked into a type of lasagna, in which you will need noodles, ground beef, and tomatoes. Otherwise, you are free to use this placenta as you please. Recipe number 6. Recipe number 6 involves the brain. You can mix this brain with peony, black cherries, lavender, and lily flowers. This will provide a sort of liquid. There are no health benefits that are proven with this drink. However, it is known to be quite tasty. Last but not least, we have recipe 7. For this recipe, we will need to slice off the buttocks of the human. We will then steam this meat in a pot full of vegetables and broth. The amount of time it needs to be steamed is dependent on how much of the flesh flavor you want present. Finally, wrap all of your ingredients inside some dough and you'll have a dumpling. Like all chefs know, we have plenty of extra scraps after creating our recipes. Here are some ways to utilize those scraps. The first way is to use strips of cadaver skin. Tie these strips around your calves. This is supposed to help prevent cramping. The skin is not actually green, I just need it to differentiate from the skin on the leg. The next way is to inject syringes of blood into the face of a patient. This is supposed to help cure eczema. The next way is by swallowing human fat. By swallowing human fat, this has been known to help heal bruising. My grandmother did not come up with all these recipes on her own. She had lots of help and read through many different resources. Here are some of the resources that she used to help her create these recipes.